In the summer of 1972, an ordinary family set out for a weekend camping trip in the deep forests of Oregon. They packed their station wagon with sleeping bags, lanterns, and food. Neighbors waved as they pulled away. It was supposed to be 2 days of fresh air, fishing, and campfires. But by Monday morning, they had vanished. The car was later found parked neatly on a dirt road, keys still in the ignition, doors locked. Inside were their clothes, food, and even the father's wallet, cash untouched. A camp stove sat in the back seat ready to be used. It was as if they had stepped out for just a moment and never returned. No bodies, no signs of struggle, only silence in the trees. Imagine if it was your family, their belongings waiting patiently, but no voices, no laughter, no footsteps returning to the car. What would you think happened? If this happened in your town, what would you believe? Comment your country below, and if you haven't already, subscribe, because these are the cases that history wants us to forget. But we won't let vanish. This is the story of the Oregon forest family that disappeared in 1972. And tonight, you'll walk into those woods with them. You begin with the road itself. A narrow strip of gravel winding into the dense Oregon forest, the kind of road where silence feels thicker than the trees. You can imagine the station wagon bouncing over the ruts, dust swirling behind as it climbed deeper into the pines. It is 1972, the middle of summer, and the forests are alive with cicadas, the air heavy with the smell of resin and moss. The family inside the car is ordinary in every way. A father in his late 30s, a mother with careful hands, 2 children leaning against the glass watching the blur of trees pass by. They are not wealthy, not famous, not unusual. They are simply a family looking for a weekend of fresh air, escape from the noise of the city. They chose a forested campground that promised seclusion, a picnic table under fir trees, a fishing stream a mile away. It was meant to be quiet, safe, normal, but normal never lasts. The car is later found parked neatly off that same road. Its engine is silent. The keys sit in the ignition as though waiting. The doors are locked. Inside are groceries still wrapped, a camp stove, blankets, a cooler half filled with melting ice. The father's wallet rests on the seat, cash and cards untouched. Shoes line the floorboards in pairs as if placed there. Nothing is missing. Nothing is disturbed. It looks less like a crime scene and more like a family paused mid-breath. Imagine stumbling upon it. You open the door expecting voices. Instead, you hear only the forest. The air smells of pine and damp earth. There are no footsteps leading away. No tire marks suggesting another vehicle. Just silence pressing against your ears. At first, the sheriff's deputies treat it as a routine missing persons case. Maybe the family wandered off for a hike. Maybe they became lost in the woods and would return at dusk. But dusk comes. Then night. The station wagon sits unmoved, headlights off, its windows reflecting only stars. The forest is not forgiving at night. You picture search teams fanning out, their flashlights piercing through brush, voices calling names that are swallowed instantly by the trees. Dogs sniff along the dirt, catching nothing but the scent of pine needles and damp soil. Volunteers comb trails, expecting to find signs, broken branches, dropped food wrappers, footprints in mud. But they find none. The ground looks untouched, as though no human ever passed. Still, hope lingers in the first days. Maybe they reached a ranger station. Maybe they are camped in a clearing out of sight. Maybe they simply decided to leave, forgetting their belongings. But those hopes erode quickly, because families don't leave wallets. Children don't leave shoes. And no one leaves their car locked neatly on the roadside if they intend to come back. You imagine being their neighbor, remembering the cheerful wave as they pulled out of their driveway that Friday. You remember the bags in the back seat, the fishing rods, the cooler packed with sandwiches. You imagine learning days later that all those items were found untouched, that the family you knew had stepped out of their own lives and into a void. The sheriff widens the search. Helicopters sweep the canopy. More dogs are brought in. The forest becomes a map marked with grid squares, each one walked and rewalked by searchers with radios. Days pass, nights pile up, and still nothing. But then something stranger emerges. A hunter reports hearing children's laughter deep in the woods on the second night. He insists he followed the sound, expecting to find campers. Instead, he found an empty clearing, grass flattened as if bodies had rested there, but no one in sight. When deputies return to the same spot, they find nothing. No flattened grass. No sign anyone had been there. Was the hunter mistaken? Or did the forest reclaim the evidence as quickly as it gave it? You can feel how the mystery deepens. The family had no enemies. No debts, no reason to vanish. Neighbors described them as friendly, stable, ordinary. The father worked at a hardware store. The mother volunteered at a local church. The children played Little League and rode bikes down suburban streets. They were not the kind of people who walked away from life. And yet here they were, gone. Theories sprout like weeds. Some say they were taken. Others say they became lost and succumbed to the elements. A few whisper darker ideas that the forest itself holds them, the way it has held so many before. Oregon is full of missing cases. Hikers who vanish mid-trail, campers who never return. Most are explained. Some are not. This family falls into the second category, and just when you think the investigation will uncover answers, it falters. No bodies. No struggle. No ransom note. The sheriff issues statements that sound less like truth and more like placeholders. We are pursuing every lead. The search is ongoing. We remain hopeful, but hope dwindles. Weeks later, the car is towed from the roadside. It is placed in a lot, evidence tags dangling from its handles. Dust gathers on its hood. The belongings inside are inventoried and locked away, and the silence grows heavier. You can picture the forest now, weeks later. The same trees, the same dirt road, the same indifferent sky. Nothing looks different, but something has changed forever. Because somewhere in those woods, an ordinary family stepped into nothingness, and what comes next will make you question whether they ever left those trees at all. You begin with the sound of boots in undergrowth. A week has passed since the family vanished, and the Oregon forest is no longer quiet. Search teams sweep through the trees, their radios crackling, their flashlights slicing through the green gloom even in daylight. Helicopters circle above, blades chopping the air, eyes scanning for movement. From the ground you can hear the distant thrum, a reminder that someone, somewhere, is still looking. The sheriff's department is joined by volunteers, loggers familiar with the terrain, hunters who know the ridges and streams better than any map. Teenagers with nothing but flashlights and determination. They comb every path, every gully, every thicket. They shout the family's names until their throats ache. Their voices echo and then die, swallowed by the forest. At first, there is confidence. Someone lost can be found. A wrong turn can be corrected. But each day without discovery bends confidence into doubt. Food runs out quickly in the wilderness. Nights are cold even in summer. Children cannot last long without shelter, and yet no sign appears. No footprints, no scraps of clothing, no trail of broken branches. It is as though the forest swallowed not just the family, but the evidence they ever existed. Still, strange reports drift in. A logger swears he saw smoke rising one night in a distant valley. Searchers hurry there expecting a campfire. They find only damp ground and the scent of ash as though something burned days before. Another man claims he heard a woman calling faintly from the ridge, but when he climbed he found nothing but wind. The deputies file these reports but offer no explanations, and just when the search seems futile, the press arrives. Newspapers across Oregon print the story. A family vanishes in the woods. The word spread quickly. Mystery. Unexplained. Tragic. Reporters flock to the small town, their cameras flashing, their notebooks filling with quotes. They interview neighbors, teachers, the pastor at the local church. Everyone says the same thing. The family was normal, kind, stable. No debts, no arguments, no reason to run. The story is clean, shocking, and terrifying precisely because it lacks motive. You imagine the tension in the community. Mothers clutch their children closer. Fathers check the locks twice at night. Teenagers whisper about curses about things that live in the trees. People who once camped freely now avoid the woods. Fear spreads faster than the newsprint itself, but the press does more than amplify fear. It pressures. Reporters demand answers. Why hasn't the sheriff found anything? Why are the dogs failing? Why are helicopters flying day after day without results? Officials begin to look defensive, not confident. They widen the search radius, dragging rivers, probing caves. They bring in experts from outside the county. And still, nothing. And then comes the first break, or at least what feels like one. A fisherman casting in a stream miles from the car hooks something unusual. Not a fish, but cloth. When he pulls it in, he finds a child's shirt, waterlogged, torn at the sleeve. Deputies seize it immediately. Neighbors confirm it matches what one of the children wore the day they left. For a moment, hope surges. They are near. They can be found, but the search around that stream reveals nothing else. No footprints, no bodies, no belongings. Just one shirt drifting alone, raising more questions than it answers. Did the child wander there? Was it carried by water? Or placed deliberately? Theories multiply. Some insist it was an abduction. Perhaps the family was taken by someone who knew the woods well. Someone who forced them deeper and left the car as a decoy. Others suggest the forest itself is responsible, that there are places within it where people step in and never step out. These whispers grow louder after an old logger mentions that in his father's time, entire search parties once vanished briefly in fog, reappearing hours later with no memory of what they'd seen. His story is dismissed officially but repeated quietly in diners and kitchens. The sheriff holds press conferences, his face tight with exhaustion. He repeats the same lines. We are exploring all leads. The search continues. We remain hopeful. But each repetition sounds thinner, like a paper worn by too many folds. Behind him, maps are pinned to the wall, red markers spreading across valleys and ridges like a disease. Each marker is a place searched. Each one is empty. And still the station wagon waits in the evidence lot. Deputies study it over and over. They test the ignition, search for fingerprints, examine the tires. Everything is ordinary. The keys turn smoothly. The gas tank is half full. There are no signs of tampering. The car is as unremarkable as the family who drove it. And perhaps that is the most terrifying detail, that something so ordinary could vanish so completely. You can imagine the children's bedrooms back in town. Posters on the wall, toys lined neatly on shelves, clothes folded in drawers. A dog waiting by the door, all untouched, waiting for voices that never return. For neighbors, that silence is louder than the forest itself. Weeks pass. The search shrinks. Volunteers drift away, tired and hopeless. Helicopters fly less often. The sheriff begins to talk less about finding the family and more about closure. But closure requires something tangible. And there is nothing tangible here. Only a shirt, a car, and silence. Still, one last rumor stirs the town. A hiker claims to have found a clearing deep in the woods where the ground was scorched in a perfect circle. No fire pit, no logs, no explanation, just earth blackened as if by heat. Deputies dismiss it as lightning strike, but the hiker insists the pattern was too clean. He says the silence in that clearing was unbearable, as though the forest itself held its breath. He swears he will never return. And just when you think the case has reached its dullest point, the sheriff receives an anonymous letter. No signature, no return address, just a few words typed unevenly. You're looking in the wrong place. The letter offers no directions, no explanations, only that single chilling line, and it changes everything. You begin with the letter. A single sheet of paper typed unevenly on an old machine, the ink slightly smudged. It arrived in a plain envelope. No return address, no fingerprints, nothing that could tie it to a sender. Just one line. You're looking in the wrong place. The sheriff reads it over and over. Deputies gather in silence, each weighing the meaning. Does it suggest the family is alive somewhere else? Does it mock the search? Or is it bait, meant to pull resources away from the woods? No one knows. But one thing is certain. It proves someone out there is watching the investigation closely, someone who wants them to doubt the ground beneath their feet. The letter changes everything. Federal agents are notified. The FBI, already stretched thin in the 1970s with organized crime and political unrest, sends a small team to Oregon. They arrive in suits too formal for the mud of the forest, their presence sparking both relief and suspicion. Locals wonder why the federal government cares so much about one missing family. The sheriff insists it's standard protocol, but in diners and grocery stores, whispers grow louder. People suspect there is more to this disappearance than anyone admits. You can picture the agents in the evidence room, standing over the family's belongings. Wallets, shoes, groceries, a cooler of spoiled food. Nothing unusual, nothing pointing to conspiracy, but their eyes linger on the typewritten letter. They send it to a lab for analysis, testing the ink, the paper, the font. Weeks later, results return. The paper is common, the ink generic, the typewriter impossible to trace. In other words, nothing. And yet the message itself cannot be dismissed. The FBI expands the search radius beyond the forest, canvassing towns miles away. Motels are checked. Truck stops are questioned. Highway patrol scans for sightings. Still nothing emerges. The family's trail begins and ends with the car. Everything else is absence. But the absence begins to take on shape. Reporters latch onto the letter. Headlines shift from family lost in forest to FBI probes possible abduction. The word abduction carries weight. It suggests intent, not accident. It invites speculation of criminal hands, not natural misfortune. And with that shift, the case explodes into rumor. Some claim the family stumbled onto something they shouldn't have seen. A drug route through the mountains. A smuggler's cache. A hidden operation guarded with violence. Others whisper about cults in the woods. Groups that meet in secrecy, chanting under moonlight, luring outsiders who never return. Still others say the government knows more than it admits. That the FBI's interest is proof of something larger, darker, and hidden. Imagine being a local then, living in that tension. The woods you once hiked freely now feel hostile. The road you once drove casually now looks like a trap. At night your children ask if the missing family will be found. You hesitate before answering because the silence has already answered. Still investigators press on. They revisit the clearing where the hunter swore he heard children's laughter. This time they bring specialists measuring radiation, soil composition, even tree growth. The readings are ordinary. The soil is healthy. Nothing is out of place. Yet one agent notes in his report that the air pressure felt wrong, as though heavy without weather. His note is buried in the files, ignored by superiors. Then comes another unsettling detail. A logger finds a shoe deep in the woods, its laces still tied, its leather stiff with damp. Deputies bring it in, and neighbors confirm it belonged to the mother. The shoe is clean of blood, undamaged except for one detail. The sole is burned, not charred by fire, but warped by heat in a way no forest floor could cause. The FBI files it under inconclusive, but in private deputies whisper, something doesn't fit. And just when you think the case will stabilize, a second letter arrives. This one is shorter, handwritten this time in blocky letters. It says only that stop looking where the trees grow thick. Look where the ground burns. The sheriff grows pale. Deputies argue whether it's a hoax. The FBI tightens control, locking evidence away, restricting press access. But the damage is done. News leaks. Ground burns becomes the new phrase in town, muttered in hushed tones. People remember the hiker's story of scorched circles. They connect dots that may not exist, but once connected cannot be undone. You can feel the shift. The disappearance is no longer a local tragedy. It has become a national mystery. Cameras return, broadcasting images of search teams of weeping neighbors of the station wagon in its evidence lot. The family's faces appear on posters, on nightly news, on missing persons reports across state lines. The nation watches and waits, but watching does not bring answers. The FBI eventually scales back. The sheriff grows older, his hair gray, his voice tired. New cases push the old one aside. The forest regains its silence, but the wound never closes. Families avoid camping near that road. Hunters change their routes. The story passes into local legend, told in whispers around campfires. Parents warn their children, don't wander too far into the woods, or you'll vanish like the family in '72, and then, decades later, another storm brews, because every so often, the forest gives something back. In 1992, hikers stumble upon bones deep in a ravine. The remains are partial, weathered, scattered. Forensic testing begins. Hopes rise. At last, closure. But results reveal the bones belong not to 4 people but to 1. And not an adult, a child. The age matches one of the missing. The cause of death is undetermined. Suddenly the case is alive again. The sheriff who once led the search is retired. The deputies are gone. But the press returns, cameras hungry, headlines screaming. Bones found in Oregon woods, 1972, case reopened. Families relive their fear. The town relives its whispers. And investigators are forced to reopen files that never should have closed. Yet the bones raise more questions than they answer. Why only 1?
Where are the others?
Why does the child's shoe logged decades earlier not match the bone's location? And most haunting, what force could erase 3 lives while leaving only fragments of a 4th? You can imagine the unease in the town again. Decades after the first search. Old neighbors shake their heads, saying it was never just the storm, never just the woods. Younger generations hear the story for the first time, wondering how something so terrifying could have remained unresolved for so long. And just when you think the discovery of bones should bring peace, it does the opposite. Because bones are not closure, bones are a reminder that somewhere in those woods a truth waits. And the truth is not done haunting. You begin with a ravine, steep and overgrown, the kind of place no one visits unless forced. In 1992, hikers scramble down its slope in search of shelter from rain. Their boots slip on wet moss, their hands grab at roots, and then one of them stops. Beneath a rock ledge lies something pale, something that should not be there. At first they think it is driftwood, bleached by years of weather. But driftwood does not have sockets. Driftwood does not have teeth. The discovery shocks the town. After 20 years of silence, the forest has finally given something back. Deputies swarm the ravine, marking the site with tape, photographing every angle. Evidence bags fill with fragments, bones, scraps of fabric, soil samples. For the first time in decades, there is something tangible, something that can be tested. You imagine the sheriff's office now filled with boxes dragged from storage, dusty files, faded photographs, typewritten reports. The old case is reopened. Retired deputies are called for interviews. New investigators pore over maps comparing the ravine to the original search grids. And one fact is unavoidable. This place was searched in 1972 thoroughly. Nothing was found then. So why now? The bones are sent to a modern lab. Forensic science has advanced since the '70s. DNA testing is possible. Radiocarbon dating can measure exposure. Specialists clean and examine each fragment under sterile light. Weeks pass before results arrive. The remains belong to a child, between 8 and 10 years old, consistent with the age of the family's son. But the answers stop there. The cause of death is listed as undetermined. The bones show no obvious trauma, no breaks, no weapon marks. Soil analysis reveals no chemical traces. Time of death cannot be pinned precisely. All that is certain is this. The child died decades earlier, roughly within the time of the disappearance. You can feel the frustration. Closure should follow discovery. Instead, the discovery only widens the wound. The media descends again. Headlines scream, "Bones found in Oregon woods, 1972 family mystery reopened." Cameras roll outside the sheriff's office. Reporters interview locals who still remember the summer of the disappearance. Gray-haired neighbors describe the search, the fear, the unanswered questions. Younger residents hear the story for the first time, stunned that something so haunting could have happened in their own backyard. And then the theories return. Some say the bones prove the family met with foul play. that someone killed them and scattered the remains. Others point out the bones were alone. Where are the parents? Where is the sister? How could only one child surface after all this time? More chilling whispers suggest the bones were moved there later, placed deliberately to be found, as if someone wanted to stir the case again. The sheriff's department works alongside the FBI now, sharing files, scanning old evidence. The letters from 1972 are revisited. You're looking in the wrong place. Look where the ground burns. At the time, they seemed like taunts. Now, with bones discovered in a ravine once marked searched, the words feel prophetic. Were the investigators misled or guided? Still, the ravine itself raises questions. Soil specialists report unusual patterns. The top layer seems disturbed, as though turned over within the last decade, not two. The moss growth on nearby rocks does not match natural timelines. Some scientists suggest erosion exposed what was buried long ago. Others believe someone placed the bones deliberately, years after the disappearance. Either possibility is unsettling. You imagine the families watching the news in 1992. Parents who once prayed for answers, now older, their hair white, their voices trembling. They are handed a fragment of truth, but not enough to rest. To know a child died is pain. To know nothing else is torture. And just when the town begins to process the revelation, new evidence complicates everything. In the same ravine, searchers uncover a shoe. Small, leather cracked, its sole warped by heat. Deputies compare it to the shoe logged in 1972, the one found with a burned sole. At first they assume it's the same, but analysis reveals it is not. This is a second shoe, nearly identical, found decades later, yards from the bones. Two shoes, 2 decades apart, both burned in unnatural ways. The coincidence is too great. Investigators dig deeper, searching the ravine inch by inch. More fragments appear, bone slivers, unidentifiable, weathered. But no complete skeleton. No adult remains. No second child. Only scattered pieces, like a puzzle with missing parts. And then the rumors ignite again. Some say the family was taken by a cult that used fire in rituals, explaining the scorched shoes. Others claim the government moved the bodies, leaving only fragments as a message. A few whisper something darker, that the forest itself burned away what it did not want found. The FBI holds press conferences, careful with words. They call the case active, they call the evidence inconclusive, they urge patience. But patience has worn thin. 20 years of silence followed by fragments is not an answer. You picture the ravine at night now, lit by floodlights, agents in gloves sifting soil, measuring, bagging, cataloging. Their faces are grim. They know the more they find, the less sense it makes. Still, the bones force the case into the modern age. DNA samples are compared against surviving relatives. Matches confirm identity. The child is named in official reports, his face printed again in newspapers. The family is remembered, mourned anew. Vigils are held in town, candles flickering against the dark, prayers whispered into the silence. But closure does not come. Because bones without cause, without context, without the others, are not closure. They are an invitation to dig deeper, to reopen wounds, to chase truths that still refuse to surface. And just when investigators think the case cannot twist further, another discovery arrives. A retired logger, now in his 70s, comes forward with a story he kept for decades. In the summer of 1972, he says he saw lights in the forest. Not lanterns, not flashlights. Bright white circular lights moving silently between trees. He thought they were search teams at first, but when he approached, the lights lifted upward, disappearing into the canopy without sound. He never told anyone, fearing ridicule, but when he read about the burned shoes, he felt compelled. His story is dismissed officially, but whispered privately. And now the case is no longer just a cold file. It is something else, something that moves between fact and legend, between evidence and fear. The forest has given back a child, but it has not given back the truth, and the truth may be darker than anyone imagined. You begin in the glare of television cameras, It is 1992, and the small Oregon town that had lived quietly with its unsolved mystery for 2 decades is suddenly thrust back into the spotlight. News vans line Main Street. Microphones crowd the sheriff's desk. The discovery of a child's bones has reignited the case, and the world wants answers. You imagine standing in that room as reporters shout questions. Are you treating this as homicide? Where are the other remains? Is the FBI back on the case? The sheriff, older now, clears his throat and repeats the same words. The investigation is active. We are pursuing every lead. But his eyes betray fatigue. He has lived with this case longer than anyone else. And the weight has only grown heavier. The FBI returns with renewed interest. Agents open boxes sealed since the 70s, reviewing letters, photographs, soil samples. They compare the burned shoes found decades apart. They re-examine the typewritten notes that once seemed like cruel jokes. And though science has advanced, the answers remain elusive. DNA confirms identity, yes, but DNA cannot explain cause. It cannot fill the gaps of 20 years of silence. Still, technology brings new hope. Forensic teams test soil from the ravine. They discover chemical traces inconsistent with natural decomposition. Elevated levels of phosphates and calcium suggest manipulation, possibly lime, possibly heat. The idea of deliberate burial begins to overshadow the idea of accidental death. Someone, it seems, placed the bones where they were found, and that suggestion spreads like fire. Reporters frame headlines around words like cover-up and foul play. Theories multiply. Did someone abduct the family, dispose of them, and return years later to scatter remains? Was the ravine a dumping ground or a stage? Every answer only leads to darker questions. The community grows restless. Neighbors glance at each other in suspicion. Old grudges resurface. People recall strange details they once ignored. A man who moved away suddenly, a camper who stayed longer than most, a neighbor who burned trash late at night. Rumors leap from household to household, feeding on silence, and then journalists arrive, hungry for angles. True crime magazines feature the case. Television specials air reenactments, actors playing the missing family, dramatic music swelling under narrations. They focus on the car, the abandoned belongings, the untouched wallet. They highlight the mystery letters, the scorched shoes, the solitary bones. Viewers across the country sit in their living rooms, wondering how an entire family could vanish without explanation. Imagine watching one of those specials as a local. To you, this is not entertainment. This is a wound. These were your neighbors. Their faces still hang in the post office, faded by sunlight. Their story is not a puzzle, it is grief. And now strangers pick it apart for ratings. Still, publicity has its effect. New tips flood in. People claim sightings from decades earlier. A family matching the description at a gas station in Idaho. A woman with children on a bus in California. A man fishing alone in Washington. Most are unverifiable, blurred by time, distorted by memory, but investigators chase them anyway, desperate for movement. Yet one tip stands out. A former truck driver calls in, saying he remembers transporting crates through the area in 1972. Crates marked only with codes, guarded by men who said little. He recalls being paid in cash, told to avoid certain roads. He claims he later recognized one of those men in a photograph connected to organized crime. His story is thin, unverifiable, but it injects a new possibility, that the disappearance was not random, but entangled in something larger. And just when investigators try to untangle the threads, new science complicates them further. In the late 1990s, forensic genealogy begins to emerge. Technicians attempt to compare DNA from the bones to distant relatives, hoping to trace lineage to confirm beyond doubt. The results are solid. The remains belong to the missing son. But alongside certainty comes dissonance. The timeline of decomposition does not fit neatly with the date of disappearance. Some scientists suggest the bones were exposed to elements more recently than 1972, as if they had been stored elsewhere, then placed in the ravine later. That suggestion unsettles even hardened agents because, if true, It means someone kept the remains for years. Theories darken further. Cult activity is whispered again. Oregon in the 70s and 80s saw fringe groups, communes, rituals. Could the family have stumbled onto one? Were they taken and silenced? Or were their remains used for something before being discarded? The questions grow heavier than the answers. Meanwhile, locals report strange encounters. A hunter claims he saw men in dark clothing combing the forest at night, decades after the case had gone cold. A woman says she found symbols carved into trees near the ravine, circles crossed with lines, faint but deliberate. Deputies investigate, but the carvings are weathered, impossible to date. They file it as inconclusive, but in a town already primed for fear, inconclusive feels like confirmation. The story evolves into legend. Parents warn children not to wander into the woods. Teenagers dare each other to visit the ravine at night, whispering about ghosts. The forest itself becomes a character, silent, watchful, dangerous. And each storm that knocks branches down feels like a reminder of what lies beneath. You can imagine the investigators in the 2000s, now armed with better technology. Ground-penetrating radar scans soil for disturbances. Thermal imaging surveys the forest at night. Drones buzz above the canopy. Yet for all the modern tools, the result is the same. No further remains, no hidden graves, only echoes. Still, one discovery stirs the case again. In 2003, a journalist researching the disappearance uncovers a box of files mislabeled in county storage. Inside are photographs from the original search, grainy black and white images of the car, the clearing, the volunteers. But among them is one photograph never referenced in reports. It shows a circle scorched into the ground, roughly 10 feet across, grass burned away, soil darkened. Deputies at the time dismissed it as lightning strike. But the photo predates the hiker's story of scorched ground, predates the second letter's warning. The journalist publishes the photo, and suddenly the phrase, "Look where the ground burns," is back. What did the letters mean? Who sent them? Were they guiding or taunting? Why would a burn mark exist in a forest with no record of fire? The questions draw national attention once more. Television revisits the case. Documentaries speculate. Paranormal investigators descend on the woods, claiming electromagnetic anomalies, recording static-filled audio they call voices. Scientists roll their eyes, but locals cannot ignore the parallels. And just when skepticism should silence the whispers, another detail emerges. A hiker in 2006 claims to have seen a flicker of light at night deep in the forest. Not fire, not lantern, a pale circular glow moving silently between the trees. He follows, heart pounding, only for the light to vanish as suddenly as it appeared. His camera captures nothing but blur. Officials dismiss it, but the town remembers, because the description matches the logger's account from 1972, decades apart. Same lights, same silence. By the late 2000s, the case is both an investigation and a myth. FBI files remain classified. Locals cling to their theories. Families of the missing cling to hope, though most know closure will never come. The woods remain unchanging, indifferent. And the station wagon, long since released from evidence, rusts in a junkyard, its doors ajar, its history intact. But the most haunting truth is this. Every discovery, every advance, every revelation leads not to clarity but to deeper confusion. Bones without cause, shoes burned by heat no one explains, letters that predict what should not be predictable, lights seen decades apart. The forest still holds its silence. And silence after all these years feels deliberate. You stand at the edge of the ravine now, looking down where the bones were found. The trees sway above, the air heavy, the ground damp. You listen, there is no sound but wind. But in that absence, you feel presence. Watching. Waiting. And just when you think the story cannot grow darker, another file surfaces. One that suggests the family may not have vanished together. You begin with a file box no one was meant to see. It is 2011, nearly 40 years after the disappearance, when a county clerk uncovers a set of records mislabeled in archives. The folder is thin, Its paper brittle, the ink fading. But what it contains unsettles everything believed about the case. Insider interview transcripts from 1972 never released to the public. A trucker who swore he saw the family's station wagon pulled to the side of a highway, hours after deputies had already logged it abandoned in the woods. A teenager who claimed she saw a woman with 2 children at a gas station, 50 miles away the same night. Both testimonies dismissed at the time, both buried quietly under not credible. You imagine reading those words decades later, realizing they suggest a possibility no one had considered seriously, that the family did not vanish together, that they were separated, that the car was planted deliberately. The idea spreads quickly. Journalists seize on it. Newspapers run headlines. Did the Oregon family ever reach the forest? Television segments reconstruct maps drawing red lines across highways, circling gas stations long since demolished. Locals argue in diners. Some insist the forest swallowed them whole. Others point to the testimonies and whisper, maybe they never made it to camp at all. The FBI remains silent. Freedom of Information Act requests are filed. Most are denied. What little is released is heavily redacted, black bars swallowing sentences, pages stamped classified. The secrecy fuels paranoia. Why would the government hide details of an ordinary missing family? Unless the case was never ordinary. Still, investigators press forward. DNA evidence is re-examined with modern techniques. The bones of the boy, tested again, reveal slight traces of isotopes in his teeth, suggesting he spent weeks eating food from a region hundreds of miles away. Not Oregon. Specialists argue over the findings. Some call it contamination. Others believe it is proof the child lived after the disappearance, held somewhere else before being placed in the ravine years later. That revelation chills anyone who hears it because it means at least one of them may have survived only to meet a darker fate later. And just when you think the case has reached its strangest point, another witness surfaces. An elderly nurse, retired now, steps forward claiming she remembers a woman bringing 2 children into an emergency room in late 1972. The woman gave no name, paid in cash and left before records were taken. The nurse recalls the girl had a broken wrist, the boy a deep cough. She never connected it until she saw their photographs decades later. Investigators search hospital archives, but no file exists. Still, the nurse's memory is unwavering. Imagine being one of the relatives hearing this testimony. For decades you believed they vanished in the woods. Now you are told they may have lived hidden, unseen for weeks or months. Hope sparks for a moment, only to be crushed by the knowledge that if they lived, they still never returned. The forest begins to feel less like a culprit and more like a cover. Rumors of cult activity return, louder than before. Old stories of remote cabins, of rituals under moonlight, of outsiders who never came back. Locals recall symbols carved into trees, scorched circles in fields. A few claim the letters, "You're looking in the wrong place. Look where the ground burns," would remind were not taunts but instructions. That someone tried to steer investigators away from the forest toward where the family was actually held. But if that is true, why did the warnings stop? Journalists dig deeper. In 2014, an investigative reporter publishes a book compiling every scrap of evidence, every rumor, every suppressed file. In it, she suggests the possibility of government involvement. She highlights the secrecy of the FBI, the refusal to release files, the redacted pages. She interviews retired agents, most of whom refuse to comment. One, speaking off record, says only, "There are things in that case we were told never to touch." He does not elaborate. He does not have to. The silence says more than words. And then, in 2017, technology adds another twist. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the ravine reveal anomalies, shapes deep below the soil, too regular to be natural. Excavations begin carefully under supervision. Layers of earth are peeled away. At first, nothing. Then fragments of metal, rusted, bent, unrecognizable. But one piece is clear. The remains of a padlock fused shut by heat. Investigators wonder what was locked here. A container, a door? And why was it destroyed? Theories splinter again. Some argue it was evidence of storage, that the family was confined underground before their remains were dispersed. Others whisper of tunnels, caverns, places where light does not reach. Paranormal investigators claim it proves ritual sacrifices. Scientists call it coincidence, but the padlock remains. You can imagine the unease in town now, 50 years later. Generations who never knew the family still live in their shadow. Children grow up hearing the story whispered like a warning. Tourists come seeking haunted legends. Hunters avoid the ravine altogether. The place has become more than history. It is myth carved into soil. And still the files grow. A newly declassified memo from the 70s mentions outside interference in the search. What interference? By whom? The page ends before it answers. Another redaction. Another silence. And silence by now feels deliberate. You picture yourself standing in the evidence room today, looking at the boxes stacked high. Wallets, shoes, bones, letters. Each object whispers fragments, but none of them speak the whole. They are puzzle pieces that never fit, hints of a story that refuses to align. And then comes the final detail of this chapter, the one that forces you to look at the case differently. In 2020, a hiker exploring near the ravine finds something small, almost unnoticeable. A locket, tarnished, mud-streaked but intact. Inside is a photograph of the mother, smiling faintly, hair pinned back, eyes direct. On the opposite side, a single word scratched faintly, alive. The locket is turned over to authorities. Analysts debate whether the word was carved before or after the disappearance. The etching is crude, shallow, nearly erased by time. But the implication lingers. Did she survive long enough to leave a message? And if she did, why was no one there to find her? The discovery shakes even hardened investigators. Because a word that simple, that haunting, suggests a truth that the files have never revealed. And it leaves you with a question heavier than all the rest. If she was alive, where are the others? You begin with the locket. Found in mud, tarnished but intact, its faint inscription, alive, sparks a fire across the nation. For weeks after its discovery in 2020, television anchors speak the family's name as though the disappearance happened yesterday. Newspapers print the photograph inside the locket, her face clear despite decades buried. Social media spreads the image, hashtags trending, strangers across the world offering theories. For the first time in years, the missing family's story leaves the county and enters global conversation. You imagine scrolling through comments beneath the news articles. Some say the locket proves she survived. Others claim it's a hoax planted by thrill seekers. A few suggest it is evidence of captivity, that she etched the word during imprisonment before being silenced forever. Whatever the explanation, one truth is undeniable. The story refuses to rest. Authorities tread carefully. The county sheriff holds a press conference, standing stiffly under fluorescent lights. He confirms the locket's authenticity but refuses speculation. We cannot assign meaning to the inscription without context, he says. His words are clinical, cautious, but his eyes flicker as he speaks, betraying unease. He knows, like everyone else, that context may never come. The FBI, contacted for comment, declines. Their silence is louder than any statement, and into that silence others rush. Amateur investigators flood the forest with cameras, drones, and metal detectors. Paranormal groups stage night vigils near the ravine, chanting, recording static-laced audio they claim contains voices. YouTube channels reconstruct the timeline, layering eerie music over grainy maps, asking viewers to decide for themselves. Podcasters debate every scrap of evidence, the scorched shoes, the bones, the letters, the lights. It becomes not just a mystery, but a phenomenon still within the town. The mood is less fascination than fear. Older residents shake their heads, tired of cameras and strangers. They lived this story once. They remember the search parties, the vigils, the unanswered questions. To them, the locket is not entertainment but another wound. Younger residents who grew up hearing whispers about the family feel torn. Some embrace the attention, believing answers may finally come. Others avoid the forest entirely, refusing to tempt whatever fate consumed the family. And then, new witnesses emerge. A woman in her 70s claims that as a teenager, she saw men unloading crates from trucks in the forest the same summer the family disappeared. She recalls lanterns, whispers, and one phrase repeated, "No one must see." At the time, she dismissed it as imagination. Now, with the locket discovered, she believes it was connected. Deputies take her statement, but official reports list it as unsubstantiated. Another man steps forward with photographs, blurry, taken on an old film camera in the 1980s. They show faint circles of scorched ground in a meadow, grass burned away in near-perfect shapes. He says he stumbled upon them while hunting. He kept the photos hidden, fearing ridicule. But when he saw the word alive etched in the locket, he could no longer stay silent. These accounts feed a theory that refuses to die, that the forest is not just a setting, but an active participant. You imagine walking those trails today. The pines loom tall, their shadows long. The ravine waits unchanged, indifferent. Every gust of wind rattles branches like whispers. Every crunch of leaves underfoot feels like intrusion. You know the statistics. Thousands of people go missing in forests each year. Most are found. Some are not. But rarely does an entire family vanish, leaving belongings, car, and silence. And just when you think the story cannot twist further, a chilling detail surfaces. The locket, examined under microscope, reveals something missed initially. The word alive was carved not in a single motion but in multiple strokes, uneven, hesitant. Analysts suggest it may have been etched under duress in darkness or by someone weakened. Tiny scratches around the letters suggest trembling hands. Whoever wrote it was desperate, perhaps leaving their final message. That detail circulates online, sparking endless speculation. If she carved it, she survived long enough to hope rescue might come. But rescue never came. Did she die in captivity? Was she silenced deliberately? Or does the locket belong to someone else entirely? Its presence in the ravine an act of manipulation? Theories diverge. One camp insists the disappearance was a crime, abduction by organized forces silencing witnesses to something hidden in the forest. Another argues for cult activity, the burned shoes and scorched circles proof of ritual. A third leans toward the paranormal, linking the light seen by witnesses decades apart to phenomena that defy science. And then there are those who believe the government knows more than it admits. The redacted files proof of secrets too dangerous to reveal. And in the middle stands the town, caught between history and myth. Local businesses see waves of tourists seeking the haunted woods. Hotels sell out. Restaurants serve visitors who ask for directions to the ravine. But alongside economic benefit comes unease. Locals resent outsiders treating their grief as spectacle. They warn tourists not to stray, not to wander too far. Some heed the warning. Others laugh until they too feel the forest's silence press against their skin. Meanwhile, investigators push forward quietly. Ground-penetrating radar surveys new sections of the forest. Drones map terrain once inaccessible. Soil samples are tested for anomalies. But results are vague, inconclusive, frustrating. Nothing explains the letters. Nothing explains the inscription. Nothing explains the silence that endures. And then, one final twist reignites fear. In 2022, a trail camera set by wildlife researchers captures something unexpected. At 2:13 a.m., the lens records a faint glow moving between trees. Not fire, not flashlight, a pale circle of light drifting silently before vanishing into darkness. Analysts dismiss it as lens flare, as artifact. But locals remember. The logger's account from 1972, the hiker's story from 2006. The same description, decades apart. The forest has not stopped speaking. It has only changed its voice. You stand at the edge of the ravine today, the air cool, the silence heavy. You think of the car left on the roadside, the shirt in the stream, the burned shoes, the bones, the letters, the locket. Each piece is real. Each piece refuses to fit, Together they form a puzzle that resists completion, a story that resists ending, and as the sun sets, you realize the most chilling truth of all. The case has never gone cold. It has only been waiting. And what comes next may finally reveal whether the family's fate was tragedy, conspiracy, or something far beyond imagination. You begin with silence. Half a century has passed since the summer of 1972, and still the story of the missing family lingers like smoke that never clears. The forest is unchanged, pines rising, rivers running, trails winding into shadow. But for those who live nearby, the woods are no longer just trees. They are a monument to what was lost, a warning carved in silence. You imagine walking those trails now. Tourists chatter nervously, pointing at maps, snapping photos, daring each other to step closer to the ravine. Locals pass by quietly, eyes lowered, carrying groceries or firewood. For them, the ravine is not a curiosity. It is a wound. A place where truth slipped away. The timeline of clues is well known. The car abandoned by the road, belongings untouched. The shirt in the stream. The burned shoes. The laughter reported but never traced. The bones in the ravine decades late. The locket with its single word, alive. Each discovery felt like a breakthrough. Each one led only to deeper shadows. And across the decades, theories multiplied. Some believe the family stumbled onto organized crime, drug runners, smugglers, or men protecting a hidden route. The sudden FBI involvement, the secrecy of files, the redacted pages all point to something larger than 4 lives. Maybe the family saw too much. Maybe their silence was enforced. Others argue for cult activity. Oregon in the 70s had no shortage of fringe groups, communes, rituals whispered about but rarely proven. The burned shoes, the scorched circles, the strange lights, all of it to believers suggests ritual. That the family was chosen, sacrificed, consumed by something human but not ordinary. Still others lean toward the paranormal. The logger's lights in 1972, the hiker's glow in 2006, the trail camera in 2022, all describing the same phenomenon. Lights moving without sound, vanishing into the canopy. Skeptics dismiss them as tricks of atmosphere, camera artifacts. But patterns over decades are harder to ignore. Could the family have been taken by something outside human explanation? And then there are those who point to government secrecy, the FBI's interest, the redacted memos, the phrase outside interference buried in a file. If the family's disappearance touched something classified, an experiment, a weapon, a cover-up, then silence would not be mystery. It would be design, but none of the theories fit perfectly. Each leaves gaps. Each explains pieces but not the whole. You picture the family themselves. A father steady and practical. A mother gentle and organized. 2 children restless and eager for adventure. They wanted only a weekend in the woods. A picnic, a stream, fresh air. That ordinariness is what haunts most. Ordinary people do not vanish into legend. And yet they did. The ravine today is marked on maps as just another depression in the land. Hikers walk past unaware. Only those who know glance longer, sensing the weight of what happened. Some leave flowers. Some whisper prayers. A few carve messages into bark. Pleas for answers. Apologies for forgetting. Vows to remember. Still, the forest does not answer. And so after 50 years, the story remains not conclusion but question. What happened in those woods? Did the family wander into something human? Criminal hands, cult rituals, government secrets? Did they cross paths with something older, stranger, beyond comprehension? Did the word alive carved into the locket mean survival? Or was it a desperate illusion etched in fear? No one knows. But the absence itself has power. It has shaped a town, unsettled generations, inspired books, documentaries, whispers, and warnings. It has turned a family into a symbol, not of who they were, but of how easily ordinary lives can vanish. And now the question falls to you. If this had happened in your town, what would you believe? Would you blame men or forces beyond men? Would you call it conspiracy or curse? Would you insist on logic or admit the limits of logic when the forest stays silent? Because silence, after all, is its own kind of answer. And as you listen to it now, you realize something chilling. This story is not finished. It cannot be finished. Until the missing are found, the truth remains buried, and some stories were never meant to stay buried. Don't let them vanish. Keep them alive with us. And now the question falls to you. If this happened in your town, what would you believe? A crime concealed for decades? A secret cult hidden in the pines? A government cover-up? Or something that cannot be explained at all? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Some stories were never meant to stay buried. Don't let them vanish. Keep them alive with us.